Outside of the die-hard fanbase and community, one thing Mortal Kombat has become especially known for in recent times are its guest characters, with people like Terminator, RoboCop, Spawn, Omni-Man, Homelander, Peacemaker all showing up in these games made by NetherRealm Studios. And while a lot of them are comic book or action movie characters, one pattern we've seen with some of the other guests have been horror or mainly slasher villains. So today, in honor of the special occasion that is Halloween, I'm going to be going through, reviewing, and then ranking every single one of the horror guest characters that Mortal Kombat has included. Hello my fellow oddities, and welcome to a new video, and here is the Halloween special. Now after Midway went bankrupt and WB bought the rights to the Mortal Kombat franchise and NetherRealm Studios was formed, we got Mortal Kombat 2011, or as most of the fans like to call it, Mortal Kombat 9. This game injected some fresh air into the series and really rejuvenated it after the 3D era, which weren't bad, but were definitely not what people were wanting at the time, and so this game kind of took it back to the basics of the arcade era. And with new management under WB, NRS was able to do a lot more than they could before with these games, including guest characters. For those who might not know the term, guest characters are when characters from other medias or other franchises appear in a franchise that isn't their original franchise or media. The first guest character to be included in Mortal Kombat was Kratos. He was a PS3 exclusive from launch of Mortal Kombat 2011. But the second guest character and the first guest DLC we've ever had is Freddy Krueger. Freddy Krueger is a slasher villain that originates from the Nightmare on Elm Street series of movies, which includes 9 films, 7 of which are part of a main timeline. There's 1 offshoot movie and 1 remake. And that remake is the last Nightmare on Elm Street movie we have ever gotten, which is really sad. But what's even sadder is the fact that because this game came out in 2011, 1 year after that movie came out, the Freddy that they chose to include in this game is the remake Freddy. And you can see that with the design where the burn scars look a lot more like the moldy cheese look of the Nightmare on Elm Street remake instead of the more pepperoni pizza look of the original films. But other than that, the remake and classic Freddy are mostly identical, but it's actually the game that actually does something new with the character design, because Mortal Kombat 9 couldn't have asymmetrical hands, because for whatever reason it would switch hands whenever the character would flip stances. They had to give Freddy 2 gloves. Now if you're looking for this character to represent and be accurate to the source material, then this is obviously not a good thing, but for the gameplay's sake, I think this is just fine because it actually allows for a lot more gameplay opportunities with him having 2 gloves, so there's a lot more combo potential rather than him just having 1 glove and having to use his other hand for just like punching, I guess. Speaking of which, Freddy's gameplay was known for its very strong zoning, with him having multiple moves where he could either throw his claws across the screen or use his claws to dig him into the ground and it'll pop up next to the opponent, and so he had a lot of ways to keep the other opponent away from him. He also has this really annoying move where he makes like green rain fall from the sky, and if it hits you, then you like fall asleep, and I don't like it. Like, why is he falling asleep in the middle of a match? Is he stupid? But yeah, as far as accuracy wise, Freddy, even though he has a lot of cool dream abilities in his gameplay, it's not actually really a reference towards anything that really happens in either timeline of movies, the original timeline or the remake timeline. He doesn't have any moves where he strings you up like a puppet or throws you around while being invisible or injecting you with God knows what. And even if you look to the remake, which of course this Freddy is based off of, none of the things he does in that movie really corresponds to anything he does in this game. So pretty much all the moves that he does in the games are basically just original moves that NRS just made up. Which isn't a huge deal, but compared to other characters we're going to talk about later who do have more references to their actual abilities in their movies, it's gonna be kinda lackluster. But what Freddy does have references are in his fatalities, specifically the first one, called Tell 'em Freddy Sent Ya, which is something he says to Kincaid at the beginning of A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, The Dream Master, after killing him.
I'll see you in hell. Tell 'em Freddy sent ya.
In the actual fatality itself, he teleports into the ground, pops up behind the opponent, stabs them, drags them down into like this little hellhole, and then from that little hellhole, a bunch of blood spurts out after dragging him down, which is a reference to the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie, where he drags Johnny Depp down into his bed before a fountain of blood just spews out. But, it's still not the worst thing that's happened in Johnny Depp's bed. In his second fatality, called Welcome to My Nightmare, which is a line from Freddy vs. Jason,
Welcome to my nightmare.
he summons a furnace, opens it, and then chucks the opponent into the furnace, where, because they're an idiot, they just stand there and burn alive instead of running away. And then Freddy closes the door on them, which happens to chop their arm off. I believe that this is a reference to the fourth Nightmare on Elm Street movie, where he takes Kristen, throws her into this furnace, which has water in it for some reason, and then she burns alive.
Leave her alone, son of a bitch!
Now no one sleeps.
Lastly, we can talk about, Freddy Krueger's story of the game, why he's here, and what happens to him in his ending. So the reason that Freddy is involved in all this Mortal Kombat nonsense is because Shao Kahn has been stealing all the souls of all the Earthrealmers, and Freddy is getting a little jealous, so he pulls him into the dream world and fights Shao Kahn there, but Shao Kahn manages to escape and pulls Freddy along with him so that they can fight, which is basically just the plot of Freddy vs. Jason, but with Shao Kahn instead. And in his ending, Freddy defeats Shao Kahn, but Nightwolf sends him back into the dream world, which Freddy is fine with because he can just go back to doing what he was doing before. And so yeah, that's Freddy in Mortal Kombat 9. I personally do have a grudge against this version of the character just because it is the remake version, so naturally, just me personally, I'm inclined to downgrade it, but really, as an adaptation, as a representation of the character from the movies, it is pretty fun. I do wish there were more references to the original series because it would just help me get my mind off all the remake stuff, and plus it's just nice to have a lot of references, which we'll talk about with some other characters who I think do this a little bit better. But moving on, Freddy was the only horror movie guest character in Mortal Kombat 9, but they didn't stop people from clamoring for another one, and specifically, they wanted one character to appear in Mortal Kombat 9 so that they could fight Freddy. And that certain character was, of course, the character that had already fought him in their movie, Jason. Unfortunately, that never came to be for Mortal Kombat 9, so we never got Freddy vs. Jason in Mortal Kombat, at least not until the mobile game. But in Mortal Kombat X, before the game was even released, Jason got announced as the first guest character. Jason Voorhees is another slasher villain from the Friday the 13th movie series, which has 12 films, which is really annoying because, Friday the 13th, there's only 12 movies. They gotta make another one. And 11 of those films are within the same timeline, with only one being the remake that doesn't take place within the same universe. Now, this Jason from Mortal Kombat X is actually not really a specific Jason from any of the movies. It's not the remake Jason, it's not a Jason from any of the main timeline entries, so this is kind of just NRS's original Jason. And how do they do? Not that great. Starting off with the design, at first glance, this Jason appears to be human, just like how he was in the first 4 Friday the 13th movies, as opposed to part 6 and onward, where he became a zombie with black skin, decomposed, all gross and stuff, which this Jason from Mortal Kombat X clearly does not appear to be, but I'm pretty sure this version of Jason is a zombie because he pulls a knife out of his neck, which regular human can't really do, and he also gets resurrected in a certain variation, and also his endings and bios and stuff all imply that he is a zombie or some type of undead creature that can revive and stuff, so I don't think he's a human. Which, if it's the case that he's a zombie, then I don't know why they didn't go with the design from part 6 onwards, especially something like part 7, which is very detailed, very cool looking, and I think would fit a Mortal Kombat a lot more, rather than just what they have, which is very bare bones and basic. From the head down, it's just kind of like a default outfit that anyone could really wear, besides it's a little bit more raggedy. I think it's supposed to be based off of how he looks in Jason X, as well as Freddy vs. Jason, but it's just kind of default looking. It doesn't look like how in those movies looked, where it was very, very raggedy, it was very dirty, very dark brown, and it just looked more put together than in this, where I feel like I could just go to my local Goodwill and like make a cosplay of this outfit basically. I mean, I already got the mask. So it wouldn't be that hard. Moving on to his gameplay, Jason has 3 different variations: Relentless, Unstoppable, and Slasher. Slasher is shockingly enough the only one where he actually uses his machete, which wouldn't be that weird if in the other 2 variations he used different weapons, because Jason is known for using many different weapons across the whole series, but in those other 2 variations he's just not using a weapon at all, so that's kind of weird. But in those other 2 variations, in Relentless, he has like this teleport ability, which is sort of accurate to the movies. There has been cases where he's appeared to have teleported, like there's no other explanation other than he teleported for why he could be in a certain place. And then there's Unstoppable, which is a variation where after dying, he doesn't actually die and he gets resurrected and a little bit more health gets regained, and you can like fight for a little longer. Now, if Unstoppable and Slasher were to merge and you were to have the machete in the Unstoppable variation, then I think that would be the definitive variation for Jason, but because of Mortal Kombat X's variation system, multiple iconic parts about characters had to be split off into 3 different versions of them, which is kind of annoying. Moving on to the fatalities, he has one called Kill for Mother, which is of course a reference to his mother, which was the killer in the first Friday the 13th movie, and it's the reason why he's killing all these camp counselors and stuff, because they killed his mom, so he's getting revenge. Now, the stuff he does in the fatality itself isn't really a reference to anything. There hasn't been really a case where Jason's slashed through someone diagonally like this, but the music that surrounds it is based off of the Friday the 13th music, which is a nice touch. And then a second fatality, called Sleeping Bag Killer, is one where he grabs the opponent by the leg, slams them around until their arms and their legs and stuff fall off, which is kind of strange. This is a very loose reference to the Part 7 kill, where a girl is trapped in her sleeping bag, he grabs her and then slams her once against a tree, and she dies from that. Obviously not really what happens in fatality, but I guess they couldn't just summon a tree or a sleeping bag or something. And as for his story, Jason just seems to kind of be here, just wandered onto the set of the Mortal Kombat world, and in his ending, Liu Kang tries to recruit him to be like one of his servants in the Netherrealm, but Jason just like kills him. So, yeah. Now, when it comes to my view of Jason in this game, he is not the greatest in terms of representing his movies, in terms of being accurate, and especially stuff like his design, his fatalities. They're all just kind of lackluster in my opinion, especially with his design, which is probably the main thing. He looks very basic. He looks like a normal dude in Jason cosplay, and even if you take off the mask, he doesn't even look like Jason. He's just like some guy. And that combined with all of his iconic character traits being separated into 3 variations, and his fatalities not being the best, it's just not the best representation of Jason Voorhees, and I wish they put a bit more effort into it, but it feels like they just put him in because they had Freddy in the last game, and were just like, people asked for Jason because I want Freddy versus Jason, and so we just have to include him. But you're not even going to get Freddy vs. Jason, so it doesn't really matter. Anyways, moving on, the next horror guest character appeared in the same combat pack that Jason did, and that is Predator. Now, some people might say that Predator isn't a horror movie franchise and that it's more action, but I consider it horror. Like, if you look at the first Predator movie specifically and you compare it to any of the other slasher movies, it's basically the same premise, so I kind of count it. The Predator is a slasher villain from the Predator movie series, which has 7 films, all of which I believe are within the same timeline. His look in the game is inspired, of course, off of the first Predator movie. None of the other Predators from any of the other movies are really iconic, I'm pretty sure, so this is the only real option. The Predator has 3 variations, including Hunter, Warrior, and Ishkuten? Ishkuten? I don't know how it's pronounced. In Warrior, he's able to self-destruct, but not actually self-destruct, just like blow up but not actually blow up. I don't know how to describe it. He like blows up the opponent, I guess. In Hunter, he's able to set up all these traps and stuff. And in Ishkuten, he's able to use his plasma blaster, shoulder thingamabobber, which is cool. Now, of course, just like Jason, I wish all of these iconic elements were just combined into one character, but because of the variation system in Mortal Kombat X, you can't really do that, so I guess it's the next best thing, which is having these 3 different variations, each of them having their own separate little quirks and stuff. Overall, I do think Predator definitely utilized the variation system better than Jason did, because in 2 variations, Jason didn't have a machete or any weapon at all, whereas Predator has a much more wide variation of weapons and tools to use, so it makes a bit more sense for him. Moving on to fatalities, his first fatality is called Ghost in Us, which is a reference to a phrase from the original Predator movie.
You're ghosting us, motherfucker.
And in the fatality, he picks up the opponent, gets one of the disc things, which I'm pretty sure is from Predator 2, shoves it into their head, and then like their brain falls out, or like the top half of their head falls out, and you can see their brain and stuff, which is a pretty cool fatality. I don't think it's a specific reference to anything that happens in the actual movies, though. What's weirder, though, is that the next fatality, called Certain Death, is actually from the original Predator movie, so I don't know why they didn't switch the names around, with Ghost in Us being for this fatality and Certain Death being for the other one. So that's kind of weird, but in this fatality, he blasts off the opponent's arm and then blasts through their head, which is a combination from 2 different kills from the original Predator movie. One where he blasts off Dylan's arm, which is played by Carl Weathers, who is also in this game as Jax. And it's also a combination with Max Kill, where he blasts a hole through their head. This one's the best beta fatality, and I'm still not sure why they named the fatalities the way they did. Like, it's kind of weird. As for story, just like Jason, and I'm pretty sure all the Mortal Kombat X guest characters, he kind of just shows up. Like, he's just there. Like, there's no real reason for why he's a part of Mortal Kombat. He's just here. But in his ending, he becomes like this apex predator, which is pretty cool. Overall, Predator is a very, very good guest character, from his design to his gameplay, which is probably like the most beloved thing about him is his gameplay, and also his fatalities are pretty decent as well. I think overall, just a very well-rounded guest, and definitely one of the better ones. Now moving on, before we get to the other horror movie guest character, which everyone wanted to see the Predator fight, we have to first go through the slasher movie villain, along with Jason, that appears in this game, and that is Leatherface. Leatherface is a slasher villain from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series of movies, which has 9 films, and oh god, the timeline's all over the place. Okay, so there's the first movie, then there's the second one, and then there's the third one, and there's the fourth one. That's the first timeline. And then there's the remakes, which there's the original remake as well as the prequel, so that's another timeline. But now things start to get messy, because now we've got Texas Chainsaw. That's its name. I don't know why it's just called that, but Texas Chainsaw. And so that is a sequel specifically to the first movie, not to the sequels. It doesn't follow Part 4, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 4, no. It follows specifically just the first movie. But there's also Leatherface, which is a prequel, but a prequel to the first movie, which is set in the same timeline as Texas Chainsaw. So that's your third timeline there, which is connected to the first timeline, but not the sequels, just the original. So like, there's some overlap there, and it gets weird. And now we have the most recent movie, which is another sequel specifically to the first movie. So now we have 4 timelines, 3 of which are connected to that first Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, one of which just doesn't have anything to do with anything. So yeah, I don't know why the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies are like this. But getting back to the game, Leatherface's design is of course based off the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, but his variations change his look drastically. There's the Pretty Lady variation, which switches him to the Pretty Lady look from the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie as well. And then there's the Butcher variation, where he takes from the design from the first remake, and then his killer design is just the standard first movie Leatherface, which is really cool, and that's a really neat touch. I wish they did that with the other characters. Like Jason could have a human variation where he looks like Part 4 or Part 3. Then he could have a, I don't know, Uber Jason look. Why not? And then he could have the standard zombie variation that the game sort of takes from, but not really. I don't know. It's still weird. As for Leatherface, he weirdly has actually a lot of variations when it comes to gameplay. There's his killer variation where he mainly uses the chainsaw, and he has this like specific berserker stance where he can like do one thing and then do another thing, do another thing. It's pretty cool. The Butcher variation mostly uses his hammer, and he has like this big overhead move where he slams the hammer down on your head, which of course is a reference to the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie where he hits the guy's head with a hammer, just bops him. And then there's a Pretty Lady variation, which weirdly enough is focused on zoning, which is not something that I thought Leatherface would be particularly good at, with zoning. But, you know, I guess it works here. Now, like Predator, Leatherface does a pretty decent job with the variation system. Of course, it's not as good as Predator because Predator has a lot more tools to work with than just a hammer and a chainsaw, but they still do good with what they've got. At least he has a chainsaw in every variation and still has the hammer in every variation. It's not like Jason where there's just one variation with the chainsaw or something, one variation with the hammer, and then a variation where he just doesn't have either. When it comes to fatalities, neither of the fatalities' names are references to anything really. The first one is called Seeing Double. In this fatality, he puts the chainsaw into the person and then drags the chainsaw up as it's like going, so it like saws him in half, which isn't a reference to anything in the movies because this is way too violent to be in any sort of Hollywood movie because they're way too strict on that sort of stuff, unless it's Mortal Kombat, in which case, yes, it's fine to show people getting sliced in half hot dog style. But what I do find interesting is that this is a very similar fatality to his Mori in Dead by Daylight, and I'm pretty sure he came in Dead by Daylight after this game was released, so it would actually be a reference from them to this game. And then in the second fatality called Hook and Sinker, he bops them on the head with the hammer, puts the hook through their like jaw, drags them up, and then saws them in half, which is a reference to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3D, or just Texas Chainsaw. That's right, I almost forgot, where he does almost the same thing, but instead of putting it through their like jaw, he puts it through their back. And as for his ending, in his ending, he tries to rizz up Cassie Cage by like serving her Shinnok's, like, I don't know if it's his face or just like his body parts or whatever. Cassie obviously doesn't like this, and so he kills her, chops her up into little bits, and then steals her face. So yeah. I think that's kind of a reference actually to the second Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie where he gets a crush on one of the characters. So I guess there's that. Overall, even though Leatherface definitely wasn't a character anyone asked for, I think it's actually a pretty good guest and a pretty good representation of his movies. It's shockingly great. I don't know if it's as good as Predator, we'll have to see later on when I do my ranking, but actually surprisingly decent. And then lastly, the last horror guest character we've ever gotten in Mortal Kombat, or at least for now. We're hearing rumors about Ghostface in Mortal Kombat 1, so we'll see about that. We have, in the second combat pack along with Leatherface, Alien. Alien is a slasher villain from the Alien series of movies, which includes 8 films, and I'm pretty sure every single one of them is within the same timeline, but they're kind of segmented up into different chunks of the franchise. So there's the first 3 movies, then there's Resurrection, then there's the 2 Alien vs. Predator movies, and then there's the Prometheus movies, which is Prometheus and Alien Covenant. In terms of design, this is pretty basic, just one of the aliens. Their design hasn't really changed too much over the course of the series, from the first one all the way to Alien Covenant, so it's kind of just basic Alien. It's just how they are. Alien's 3 variations are Acidic, which is the one where he uses acid. Yeah. Conjurer, where he summons other aliens, which is probably a reference to the Aliens movie, and pretty sure every movie after the first Aliens where there's multiple aliens running around. And then there's my personal favorite, which is Tarkatan, where he has Baraka's blades. You can probably see why that one's my favorite. Now, I'm pretty sure Alien is kind of known as a character that's not really too notable in the gameplay department, besides for one specific period of Acidic Alien, who I'm pretty sure was known as one of, if not the most broken character in all of the NRS games. Even all of Mortal Kombat. Like, it was bad. They were broken. But other than that, the gameplay was pretty fun. They had the face huggers, they had the eggs, they had the sharp tail, they had the whatever that thing's called. They had the acid, they had a bunch of cool stuff. They had the Tarkatan blades, which isn't a thing Alien usually has, but I'm going to mention it because I love Baraka so much, and you wouldn't realize it from my normal videos because I have a respective level of love for all the Mortal Kombat characters, so I'm going to talk about the characters I love a little bit more, rather than the characters I love a little bit less, but at the end of the day, I love all the characters a lot, so, you know, when I'm talking about characters that aren't Mortal Kombat characters, it's more obvious that I love the Mortal Kombat characters way more. As for fatalities, the first one is called Killer Queen, and in this one, the Queen of all the aliens comes out, stabs the opponent, rips him in half, which is pretty much a direct pull from the Aliens movie, where it does the same thing to a character named Bishop. And then the second fatality is called Deadly Hybrid, which is a fusion of Baraka's Mortal Kombat 2 fatality, where he stabs him, raises him up, and just kind of leaves him there forever. And also a reference to a bunch of kills, like pretty much the Alien's signature kill throughout the Alien franchise, where its mouth opens and then its other mouth comes out and then it like blasts through their head. It's also as Mori in Dead by Daylight. So, Dead by Daylight, copying Mortal Kombat every turn. Also, I do want to honorably mention one of Alien's brutalities, which I didn't want to talk about brutalities in this video just because it would take a lot longer than just talking about the fatalities. But in this brutality, Facehugger comes out, gets suctioned onto the character's face, they fall over, and the chestburster comes out, and they have like a feature or something of the character that they killed. So that's really cool. And then as for the Alien's ending, in this one, they take over Outworld, and the Alien Queen becomes like the Queen of Outworld, and it's pretty cool. I like it. And with that all said and done, I believe Alien is pretty decent as a guest character. Represents the series well. I think it's not as good as like Predator or even Leatherface, but I just think it does a nice job of including all the characters' aspects within the gameplay, within the fatalities, within the design. I think it's okay. Did a good job, NRS. And with that, we've gone through every single horror guest character within the Mortal Kombat franchise, so now we have to rank all of them. Coming in at last place at number 5, I'm very tempted to put Freddy here just because of how much I hate the remake, but if I'm being realistic, at number 5, I have Jason from Mortal Kombat X. I just think this is a very bare bones, basic, just the bare minimum you could do with the Jason character. His design isn't anything we've seen from the actual movies. It's not any of the super cool and detailed designs that they have, especially later on in the franchise. And they didn't really do anything with the variations either, like just very minor design elements that get changed as opposed to characters like Leatherface, where basically the whole costume is just completely different. And even the costume that they already have is just super, super boring. Just like low effort cosplay, like borderline Halloween costume territory. When it comes to gameplay, I think it's lackluster with 3 variations. Only one of them, the slasher one, is really worth being there, worth being its own variation. The other 2 is just kind of, okay, like you have one different move and that's it. So is that really like worth sacrificing the machete for? Not really. You could have a machete in all 3 variations, and I mean, besides for you having to change the slasher variation to something else, it would be a lot better. Fatalities are okay. The sleeping bag one is kind of weird just because it's supposed to be a sleeping bag kill without the sleeping bag. Also, it doesn't have the tree, so he's just like slamming him around like the Hulk. So that's kind of eh. And then the other one, it's pretty cool just because of the music and stuff and the atmosphere of it. But overall, these fatalities aren't going to be enough to save the entire character. At number 4, this one was tough between Alien and Freddy, but I think I'm going to have to give Alien the nod and go with number 4 as Freddy. When it comes to his design, the 2 gloves, I guess, is kind of cool. Like, it's not like a huge deal to me or anything, but the big thing that I don't like about his design is the fact that it's remake Freddy with the ugly burn scars and stuff. That just sucks. Like, nobody likes remake Freddy, and so I don't know why they keep including him in game and stuff over the original. His gameplay is alright. Not a lot of it is stuff Freddy has done, but all of it is stuff that Freddy can do, so I guess that's fine, okay? And just the aesthetic of it is really, really good, in my opinion. And then when it comes to fatalities, I think this is by far the best aspect of Freddy. His fatalities are really, really cool and very fitting to his character. I wish they were a bit more creative, but, it's remake Freddy, so it's not going to be that creative. But, could be a lot worse. At number 3, I have the Alien. This one is pretty well-rounded, pretty okay to me. There's not any huge dips in quality or anything like that, but it's also not extremely good or anything either. Design-wise, it's the Alien. Like, that's all you can really say. It's the Alien, so that's good. Gameplay, other than the broken stuff, is, again, okay. It's decent. I know a lot of people found it annoying that Alien stole Baraka's moves rather than just them making Baraka one of the characters in Combat Pack 2, which I understand, and I also wish that Baraka was in the game, but at least you have him at all, so that's a good thing. But it's not very accurate to the actual Alien franchise. Like, I remember thinking for a long time after this game released, and I wasn't an Alien fan back then, that the Alien would have, like, claws in the actual movie, but he never got claws, because that's not a thing. And fatalities, once again, pretty good. There's the first one, which is actually really, really awesome, where it's ripped directly from the second movie. And then there's the second fatality, where he lifts him up, Baraka, Mortal Kombat 2, and then does the classic Alien mouth thingy. So yeah, I'm pretty sure the reason I'm not putting this a little higher, like maybe it deserves a higher spot, is just because I'm not as big a fan of the Alien franchise as I am with the other 4. So I'm not going to be like reacting too much to this, but I feel like this is a fair placement. At number 2, I have Leatherface, which is very weird because most people don't really have the best like impression of Leatherface from this game, just because a lot of people did not want him to be in the game. But as a guest character, he's actually a really good representation of how he is in the movies. Design-wise is great with the 3 different variations, so you get to play as Pretty Lady Leatherface, which is like the most iconic alternate look of Leatherface. If you prefer the remake version, because I know a lot of people prefer the remake, those people are wrong. But yeah, if you're one of those weird people, you can play as the remake Leatherface, or you can play as the standard Leatherface. Gameplay is once again very well rounded, with each variation having something different and something interesting about them, with a focus on the chainsaw, a focus on the hammer, and then a focus on zoning. And then with the fatalities, they're pretty good as well. The first one isn't a reference to anything, but it's really cool, where he saws him in half. Yeah, awesome. And then the second one is a reference, and it's not a reference to a good movie or anything, but it is an admittedly very good kill from that movie, so I'm glad they brought it over to Mortal Kombat. Also, this kill proves why they should have just had a tree or something or a sleeping bag show up for the Jason kill, because a hook just like appears from literally out of nowhere, like just from the sky. Alright. If that can happen, then a freaking sleeping bag and a tree can appear. And then at number 1, I think a lot of people probably saw this coming, I have Predator. I'm not even the biggest fan of the Predator franchise. Like, I like it a little more than Alien, but compared to the other 3, it's like not even in the same league. But I have to admit, this game definitely does the best job with Predator, his design being directly from the game. You were able to play as maskless Predator, and also with the gameplay being like the most beloved thing about this character, like not only just in terms of like how funny he is, but also just in terms of how accurate it is to the movies and all the different gadgets and tools that he can use. And with him having all those different gadgets, the variation system from this game is utilized very well here, and him having a lot of potential with all 3 of those different variations for very fun gameplay. And the fatalities, I mean, the first one's like okay, but the second one is really good, with it being based off 2 kills from the first movie and combining them, because I don't think one of them could really substitute a fatality. I mean, one of them, like his arm gets blasted off and that's just it, so that can't really be a fatality, but having an arm get blasted off and then the head blast, that's really cool. So yeah, in my personal opinion, it goes number 5, Jason, number 4, Freddy, number 3, Alien, number 2, Leatherface, and number 1, Predator. So yeah, this was a super fun video to make for Halloween, and this is actually a video series I could do on other character types as well. I mean, there's the comic book characters, which is about to get 5 different versions, just like this video with the horror characters, because you got Omni-Man, you got Homelander, you got Peacemaker, you got the Joker, and you got Spawn, so that's definitely a video I can do in the future. The action movie characters don't have as many options, only 3 with Terminator, RoboCop, and Rambo, so might not be able to do a video on that, but who knows with the guest characters we'll get in the future. Yeah, make sure to check out my links in the description, including my merch store, the Mortal Kombat Retold podcast I'm working on, as well as my Twitter and my Instagram. Also, make sure to give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, turn on the notification bell, and with that being said, that's it for this video, my fellow oddities. Have a very spooky Halloween, and I'll see you next time.
Or maybe I won't.